It's a normal day of the week and a loved one goes for a walk, something they've done hundreds of times before, and nothing is out of the ordinary. Until they don't come back. You wait a couple of hours. Perhaps they've taken a detour, a new route. The sun begins to set and you start looking at your watch, worried. The hours pass and you call the police. A routine walk has turned into a manhunt. Searches find nothing. Days, months, and years pass. Hope fades, you grieve, and you move on with your life. Until they reappear, just as quickly as they walked out that door, and your life. They come right back into it. And that's not all. They have no idea where they've been all that time. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 mysterious people who vanished only to reappear. Stephen Kibaki. It's the winter of 1978 in the American Midwest, and Stephen Kibaki, a student from Hope College, is taking advantage of the last days of February before spring began to go skiing. He leaves his student digs to go on a solo cross-country skiing trip. Kibaki was an accomplished outdoorsman who climbed mountains in Europe and was an avid cross-country skier. Familiar with the area, this was an ordinary weekend pursuit for Kibaki and to those at college who knew him. However, this small excursion would end up being far from ordinary. Several days later, the alarm was raised when Kibaki failed to return from what should have been a day's activity. At the same time, snowmobilers on the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan had come across a set of abandoned skis and ski poles. The police knew immediately who they belonged to. A search party was sent out, utilizing both land and air rescue, with helicopters and locals deployed to find Stephen. Only 2 more things were subsequently discovered: Stephen's backpack and his footprints in the deep, frozen snow. There was something off about the scene, however. The backpack looked as if it had been abruptly thrown to the ground, and the heavy footprints disappeared into nothingness as if Kibaki had walked out of reality. Looking to close off the case with a sense of logic, police figured a more rational explanation. Close to the shores of frozen Lake Michigan, Stephen must have removed his skis and wandered too close to the water, falling through the ice and drowning into the watery depths below. His friends grieved, his family mourned, and life returned to normal as the months passed by. That is until 15 months later, Stephen Kibaki walked straight through the door of his family house over 500 miles away. Stephen told his recollection of events as best he could. That day, May 5th, 1979, he woke up on a grassy knoll in Massachusetts, some 700 miles due east from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes that were not his, had items such as maps and signs that were neither his nor written by him, and he had no concept of the amount of time that had passed. It was only when he was able to purchase a newspaper he would realize that he had re-emerged to consciousness 15 months later than when he first set off. The last thing he remembered before this was striding forwards on his skis as he made his way around Lake Michigan. Before he knew it, however, he experienced a momentary blip, being enveloped in a cold and frozen darkness that hurried him from one point to another, which felt like he was running. Aside from this, he had no other details to give, and yet the mystery of what happened that day in February 1978 was perhaps less about Kibaki and more about where he was. Urban myths run rife that Lake Michigan is home to cross-dimensional disappearances, essentially the Bermuda Triangle of the Great Lakes. It's not just Kibaki who went missing in this area. Ships, planes, and other people have all disappeared and for whom there was never any trace of again. As of today, Kibaki's disappearance and reappearance remains a mystery. William Bates. Back in 1902 in New York, a well-known doctor by the name of William Bates sends a messenger to deliver a note to his wife. "My dear wife," it says, "I am called out of town to some major operations. I go with Dr. Forsch, an old student, to do a mastoid, some cataracts, and other operations. He promises me a bonanza. Too bad to miss the horse show, but I am glad to get so much money for us all. I am in such a flurry. Do not worry, I will write details later. Yours lovingly, Willie." It was not out of the ordinary for the doctor to be called away on spontaneous moments like this, but his wife, Ada Seaman Bates, found something in the note puzzling. Dr. Bates was already particularly successful as one of the foremost optometrists in the city. They were already very well off, and the doctor was also not one to talk about money like this. However, Ada set this to the back of her mind and thought nothing more of it. That is, until several days had passed, and the good doctor had still not returned home. His disappearance prompted a search, not only by the local police precinct in New York City, but a wider net cast internationally by the Freemasons, the elusive organization that William Bates himself was a member of. Months passed and no news came Ada's way, up until a letter arrived at her door. News from the chapter of Freemasons based across the Atlantic 3,500 miles away in London. A character resembling Dr. Bates had been located in a London hospital, but he was not living his day-to-day as a senior optometrist. He was merely a medical assistant. The mystery only deepened when it was revealed he first came to the hospital not as a doctor, but as a patient. When he first arrived, he was so emaciated he could barely stand, looking haggard and thin, his eyes deeply sunken. This for a man whose sizable bank account should have ensured a life of luxury wherever he travelled to. Ada made the journey to England at once, but this was not to be a happy reunion. Ada Bates's joy upon seeing her husband again was short-lived. She was met with a blank stare from her long-lost husband. "I don't know why you bother, madame," he said. "We are strangers." But she was not one to let their long-standing marriage disappear like her husband had. He was persuaded by her, albeit begrudgingly, to move in with her to the Savoy Hotel where they might rekindle their relationship anew. Her efforts wouldn't pay off, as a day later, William Bates snuck out of their room, never to be seen by her again. Ada never stopped searching, sending private investigators throughout Europe and the eastern seaboard, but all in vain. She died clutching a photo of him, heavy-hearted and in anguish. But Dr. Bates's story would not end there. 8 years later, an acquaintance visiting Grand Forks, a small town of 12,000, stumbled upon a man who cast a great similarity to William. Again, there followed a clear lack of memories of his previous life. It was as if he had a chunk of his mind removed, like a slice of watermelon chopped away and eaten by an invisible monster, wrote the associate. Was this tale an episode of amnesia, or perhaps the aimless wandering a man looking to find something more than money in his life, but only ended up losing himself? Whatever the case, William Bates passed away in 1931, leaving this disappearing act a mystery forever. Linda Arteaga. The irony in Linda Arteaga's case was clear to everyone when the news of her disappearance reached major media organizations in September of 2012. Linda had gone for a walk with her brother in their local woods in the Ozarks, a mountain range just north of Arkansas, with this afternoon activity in the aid of learning survival techniques. Her brother, Eddie, was an expert in this area, but his sister Linda not so much. There was a lot of concern when Linda became separated from her brother. Walking through the forest, the pair entered a part of it that Eddie suddenly found unfamiliar, despite dozens of excursions there. With Linda beside him, he looked up through the trees hoping to find some degree of positioning from the mountains around them. When he looked beside him again, Linda was gone. A search party was sent into the forest to find her, but with winter temperatures beginning to set in and having left with barely any supplies at all, hope was fading fast for the inexperienced 53-year-old lost alone in the forest. She was to re-emerge almost a week later, dazed and confused, but saying how glad she was that the forest had released her. This disorientation did not go unnoticed, and the chief deputy of the local region, Dwayne Pierce, said when she came out of the woods she wasn't quite about her head. Linda had managed to use some of the tips her brother had imparted to her before they got separated, surviving on berries but sleeping on the cold frozen ground as she wandered through the maze of towering trees. But she maintained she was not alone through this ordeal. Dark figures in the forest appeared at dusk, silhouettes that moved through the trees. But no matter how much she screamed, they couldn't hear her. They constantly watched. Needless to say, she was relieved to step out of that forest alive. But what do you make of these mysterious disappearances and reappearances? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.